Hi, friends. Welcome back to another edition of My First Job. My name is Mike Wood, and we're coming to you from the wonderful Purple Acorn Network. A very exciting episode for us today. I'm talking to my old friend, Laurie Ruettimann. You may have met her in the HR tech space. She's worn many hats and different identities. She's kind of like the Madonna of the HR tech space, as I like to think of it. She's from punk rock HR, and she's done a whole bunch of other things. But Laurie, welcome to the show.
Mike, I am so happy to be here. Just don't call me your old friend, okay? I'm
Okay,
very
my
young.
friend for a long time.
I mean, I'm looking down the barrel at 50 and I don't want to hear it, you
This
know?
is this is how I get myself in trouble all
No,
the time.
that's not good. That's why
But
I love you.
well, I love to have you on my show. We've talked many times. We actually randomly meet up in the Outer Banks all the time because our vacations align there. So
Well, we're so rich and just it's easygoing living out in the Outer
yeah,
Banks, that's how
yeah.
that
I'm
goes.
not rich, but I have family members who do qualify. So that's where I fit in there. But so this podcast is all about your first job and kind of like your journey through your career. So I'd love to hear, what was your first job?
My first job was when I was 14 years old. And just a short little backstory, I have an unconventional childhood and bounced around a lot between different caregivers. And when I was 14, I ended up back with my dad. And the first thing I thought is, oh my God, I got to go earn some money. So wasn't sure what to do. I had babysitting in my background, but I felt like I could lie about my age, being all of 4'10" and about 85 pounds, and say that I was 16 and maybe get a real job. And sure enough, I went out there and applied to a lot of different positions. And the only person who hired me was a guy who owned an ice cream store, a Baskin Robbins franchise. And he said, listen, kid, I know you're not 14. I know you're not 16. I know you're younger. I will pay you under the table cash and it'll be our arrangement. And so I worked for him at my first job at 14 years old, scooping ice cream for almost 2 years, earning 235 an hour.
Ooh, did you get tips on top of that?
Yeah, people didn't really tip back in the 90s. That wasn't a thing. But I will tell you, many years later, like 5 years later, I got a check from the Department of Labor for almost $1,000.
Wow.
And it was crazy because someone ratted him out, right? So not only did I get like the money I was owed, but I got a fee on top of that. So yeah, that was my first job.
Now the big question is, did they have 31 flavors?
They may have had more than that. We had a lot of flavors back then, and I think if I remember correctly, my favorite was the daiquiri ice because I thought if you had enough of it, you can get drunk. Not true. I had a lot of it.
You might get diabetes, but you won't get drunk.
Correct, correct. I mean, the early seeds of my whole adulthood were planted right in that story.
So, all right. So you start off at Baskin Robbins. Did you have any kind of other like high school jobs or
Oh
stuff
yeah.
before
Oh yeah,
college?
man. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, a product of the 90s. So I worked at Baskin Robbins and then I thought, I'm going to get a real job that pays maybe minimum wage. I deserve that. I believe in me. And so I ended up working at a hot dog stand, and I don't eat hot dogs, called Big John's Hot Dogs and Beef Express, very Chicago. And then from there, I went on and worked at a Chinese restaurant called Hang Wing. And that was at the time when Rico Suave was on the radio. And so all the guys didn't speak English, but they could sing Rico Suave over and over again. So that was amazing. But the most amazing job I had after all of that was that I got hired at Blockbuster Video.
Nice.
Yes. And so I had that very, very 90s job of, rewinding videos, working at the counter, and stacking videos and drama, comedy, drama, comedy, like all these subsections. And it was just like a really fun way to earn money throughout high school and eventually be the first in my family to go to college. So, yeah.
All right. So you went to college. Where did you go? What did you want to be?
Well, as Karl Marx says, I never dreamed of labor. I think that's still my dream today is to not labor. But I thought, well, I don't know. I want to study English. I want to study writing, but I also need to make a living. And so I thought I would go to law school. And at the end of my undergraduate time, I thought, oh my gosh, I can't take on any more student debt. And so I ended up getting a job in an unfilled internship at a candy factory next to a minimum security prison for women down by the Mississippi River in St. Louis. So it was all
This
kinds of,
sounds all sorts of wrong.
it was
This sounds
terrible. It was
like
terrible. But, the internship was in human resources, and it turns out I love people's stories, and it's stuck. Not the job, but listening to people's stories about the world of work, like you're doing today. So I love this kind of stuff.
yeah, I always love hearing people's origin stories and kind of like where they started up. And I mean, we've known each other for probably a decade at this point, and
Yeah.
I'm glad you didn't go into the lawyer route. I can't really see. I mean, you could do anything you want, but I don't see you being happy being a lawyer. It was probably one of those things that everybody tells you to be a lawyer, and so it makes lots of money, and so you say, "Oh, okay, I'll do what everybody else says." And, well, here you are. So
Here I
I do
am.
know. I do know one of your first jobs was at Pfizer in the HR
Oh.
department, right?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I ended up my professional career at Pfizer, and I worked there through several iterations at different companies that they bought and sold, and I kind of went along the line. And so I ended up at Pfizer, and it's there where I realized that I was really good at HR, but really terrible at playing politics. I just, for whatever reason, had a real hard time with people who followed a chain of command, blamed other people for stuff they should know better than doing, and truly believed that a company was everything. I mean, I think I knew very early on, that your work is not your worth. And it was important to me to do something different. Like I saw people investing their whole lives in a company, and then I was part of massive restructuring. I was in charge of doing a lot of layoffs. I laid off over 10,000 people in my time at Pfizer, like me and me alone. So I was sick of being the pixie of the apocalypse, and then also being there on people's worst days of their lives. So I needed a break. I needed to get out of there. And no knock on Pfizer. They do great science, and they gave us the COVID vaccine, of which I partake in and believe in. So good for them, but not good for me.
Now, I'm wondering if they gave you the task of doing the layoffs as kind of like, okay, you're the youngest, you're sweet, you're tiny, nobody else wants to do it. Is that kind of how they did it?
There was part of that, but also because I was competent, because I could walk into a room, and even if I got it wrong, I would act like I'm doing it right. And there was also something else that was really interesting. I was available. Like a lot of people who worked at Pfizer were either boomers or very early millennials at the time. So there was a population dip with Gen Xers. And so for me, I was competent, but I was able to travel alone. I knew what I was doing. I didn't have children. I just had a husband who also worked at Pfizer. So I was like the most responsible choice around. And also that I was cute and little and sweet. Yeah, that helps.
But you can't, yeah, being there on somebody's worst day over and over and over again is I can't
Yeah.
imagine doing that.
Yeah.
I just like I could probably do it for a week, but then and just kind of stomach it. But then after a while, it's just going to be yeah.
It helped reinforce a philosophy that I have about human resources, which is the more we teach other people to do HR, the less we have to do ourselves, and we can actually do other work. So, the way I learned to implement layoffs was to really involve managers, supervisors, leaders, so that it wasn't just me delivering the bad news, but really teaching other people how to communicate and communicate with dignity. So, that was very important for me. So, while I was there and often did have to take the lead in conversations, I relied on my managers and my supervisors to really understand who we were talking to, and to deliver the message in a way that was kind and compassionate and full of dignity for the other person on the other side. So while I was there for 10,000, I didn't deliver solely 10,000, although I did my fair share.
So after Pfizer, what's next?
Well, I was writing an anonymous blog during Pfizer, and I was getting quite a few views. And I was approached by a lot of people to write professionally. Uh, I was encouraged to out myself publicly. And so when Pfizer had a round of layoffs that were going to pay a lot of money, I raised my hand and said, I will partake in that. And they were like, great. So we moved to North Carolina right around that time. And I started writing professionally for a lot of online publications, but also for a management organization called the Conference Board. And the Conference Board does like the Consumer Confidence Index. They're very notable, and they're the oldest, largest management association in America. And I met two people who changed my life. The first was my very senior editor, Matthew Budman, who was like, "We want to pay you." I'm like, "Oh, you're going to pay me for my writing? Amazing." And the second was my dear friend to this day, my very best boss that I've ever had, who is Vadim Lieberman. And Vadim taught me all sorts of things about writing, like logical fallacies and it just, misplaced confidence in my writing and, cognitive biases. And he really taught me how to write professionally. And I'm very grateful. Plus, he's a superhuman being. So, out of all of the corporate bosses I've had, Vadim Lieberman, my editor, was my best boss.
And it's amazing. So Vadim has been around the HR tech circuit himself, and I've
Yeah.
yet to meet him in person, but I know of him, and I know a ton of people who mention him all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You know why? Because I made him.
but it's funny that fate or whatever puts these good people in your lives when you
Sure.
need them, and they end up staying. So I mean, you mentioned something earlier in the podcast that you're not what your worth is for work.
Yeah, yeah, your
That's
work is not your
something
worth.
yes, and that's something from your book, Betting on You, that you wrote a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
I read it, and I'm not gonna say it changed my life, but it changed my perspective, and
No,
it
you
was
should say it changed your life. That
okay, it changed my life. I was in a ditch, half drunk, family had to come get me, and someone reached down and handed me that book.
that's right.
It's like, "You can do better."
You can do it.
No,
Well, yeah, yeah.
and I think that's very hard for people to do is decouple themselves from
That's right.
their workplace.
Yeah.
The first things people ask you is, "What do you do for work? Where do you work?"
It's such a sad statement on the world right now that we view other people through the lens of where they work. But, work for the most part is non political, it's non controversial. You ask someone where they work, and they're like, "Oh, I work at Cisco or I work at IBM. I'm a project manager." And it's safe, it's easy. But there have been a lot of people in my life who have taught me to take a more human approach. I like something called the human statement. So when I introduce myself, I may say I'm a writer or a speaker or retired, which is really what I am right now. But I will also say, I'm an auntie. I foster animals. I volunteer quite a bit. I run long distances. I try to, imbue a sense of humanity in how I introduce myself, mostly to teach other people how not to be boring. Because the most boring thing we can say about our lives is our job. Like, who gives a crap if you work in human resources? Like, what does that even mean? But it means something if you volunteer with puppies. Like, I
Yep.
want to hear that story?
Or
So,
you run around in a circle for 24 hours, which is what
yeah, you run ultra marathons, right, right, right. Again, for charity, I do these crazy things. But yes, I mean, I really believe in like starting with the more interesting facts about our lives. And I can't remember who it was, but someone once taught me to ask, "What do you do when you're not working?" Which I think is a great networking question, right? Like, who are you and what do you do when you're not working? You get some better answers that way.
I mean, it's like, so when I think about the jobs I've had over the years, I don't necessarily think about the day-to-day tasks or the work that was done. It's always the people. It's
Yeah.
always the experiences. When I was working for WorkHuman, the travel was wonderful because they were generally good people that I liked working with.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of really funny stories that happen along the way.
Sure.
But also, like, I like to say I'm a golfer. I've golfed with your husband once a year for the past 3 years or so. He beats
Yeah.
me every single time. Um,
He's old. That's why we can
well,
call him.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I got kids that are just, like, crying by the door as I'm heading off to the golf course. Daddy,
Well,
I'm
you're right. I mean, you are a multidimensional human being. What is the saying right now? We all contain multitudes, right? And
yeah.
I'm more interested in those stories versus like, some KPI that you're trying to measure to make someone else rich. I don't care. I don't care about that.
And it's always someone disproportionately rich.
Yes.
I hear, I do a lot of reading on Reddit, which is I don't know if it's good for my psyche or not, but I just read about these people that are like, I billed for my company 5 million, let's say, in this year, and I got 200,000,
Uh-huh, yeah.
which
Math.
is great, 200,000, but it's not even close to what you billed for the company.
No, no.
So it's we're all pushing it up to the one
Man,
or two people.
Mike, when did this podcast get so anti-capitalism and woke? I love it.
Okay, good. I'm not necessarily I'm anti-capitalism now. Capitalism in the 90s was kind of fun, and everybody did have an opportunity to get ahead, but now, I don't know. There's
You
a
know,
whole
it's
bunch of
definitely
barriers.
tough, but we all have to work for a living, and I think this is really important. And so, as long as you're living and breathing, and you show up any place to work, you have an opportunity to be a self leader. I mean, sure, we have to collude with our bosses, right? And sometimes we love them, and sometimes we don't. But we can absolutely live according to our values, even in a micro community, even in a small like offsite that we work in. If we're like in a chain or we're in some sort of franchise, you can always work according to your values. And so I say this to people who are like, oh, my workplace is so toxic, or oh, I'm so depressed, everybody's always angry all the time. Change starts with you, and there's no cavalry coming. I mean, I didn't invent this. My God, it's, thousands of years of philosophy, but it truly is correct that there is nobody coming to rescue you except you. And the sooner you realize that, and the sooner you can create like micro moments in your day that you can enjoy, the more you can turn it around for yourself and maybe influence others. And so while I worked at Pfizer, it's not like I was super big on laying people off. It was depressing. It was hard work. But I thought about the way that I delivered those messages. I thought about what I did to prepare for those messages. I thought about what I did to keep up with people and to coach them after they left the organization. And in fact, a lot of those interactions back then influence who I am today as a coach, as a writer, as a leader within the HR and the tech community. Those experiences taught me how to be a better human being and how to live my values. So, every environment is going to be weird anyway because we're all human, right? But the more you focus on what you can do in these micro moments and less about being a victim of some toxic work environment, I think the better and more mentally and emotionally regulated you're going to be.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's healthy or not, but I try to compartmentalize things. So, like, if I have okay, judging by your reaction, it's not
I
that
mean,
healthy.
we all need to get through the day. Yeah. But I think if you could just the bridge you build between those different compartments is the most important thing. And the bridge is I'm human and I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah, and the
Right.
day-to-day stress, you look back on some of this stuff as you get older, and you're just like, "Wow, I really shouldn't have cared about that." It's
Right.
almost like I remember, like, I'll look at pictures of myself from, like, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and I look fantastic, but
Yeah. Everybody says that.
at the time, I thought I looked like garbage.
Of
So now
course.
I look at pictures of myself now, and I say, "This is the best you're gonna look for the next 7 years."
Like, that's the wrong thing to say. The right thing to say is, "I am neutral about my body, and my appearance is not my worth." I mean, I think there are so many lessons here to take. You can be neutral about your job. You can be neutral about your family situation. You can be neutral about the world. Say, "This is not what matters. What matters is not how my hair is cut or the stupid clothes I wore, or my weight or my size." I think that's been an important lesson for me as well. It doesn't matter how much I weigh. I'm freaking awesome no matter what I do. And I do my best and I try and I'm kind and I love the people I love and I take care of the people around me.
Yeah.
And if I'm pudgy or if I'm super shredded from running ultra marathons, who cares? Because I'm still an amazing human being and I'm not ever in my life trying to appear on the cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit.
Well, I love that you take your free time to help others, to give back to charity, to do things that make you happy, such as fostering animals.
Yeah.
Nothing makes me more happy than like giving my dog a hug. So like I can imagine it. And you write, and you've been published, and you write books that help people. And
Yeah.
so, if you want to give a plug for betting on you, I mean, I'll give it a plug. I think it's amazing. You can find it on Amazon, but
You find it on Amazon, and it's almost the 4-year anniversary of the hardcover publication and about 3 years since the paperback came out. So I'm very proud of it. It's out on audiobook, to get a mainstream book published during COVID and to have it sell as well as it's sold and to also continue selling today is just a real testament to, I think, the evergreen message that has been taught to me throughout the years in that you have to bet on yourself and it's important for you to believe in you. And in fact, others won't invest in you until you invest in yourself. And so I break it down a lot of different ways in the book. And I'm so glad it flippin' changed your life, Mike Wood. I'm so glad you're out of that ditch and you put down the bottle and you're on the straight and narrow.
Exactly. Hey, didn't I see you in the gutter last week? No,
That's
I
right.
am betting on myself now.
That's
So,
right. That's right.
well, I have seen that you're doing a lot more writing nowadays. Where can people find you and your writing?
Well, they can always just find me on the internet. They can Google, I hate HR. And I'm one of the top people for that. But my name is Laurie Ruettimann, and they could just go to laurieruettimann.com and find me there. And, you know, one of the lessons I learned early on about writing is that nobody wants to read a white paper, but they do want to get a glimpse of the writer. And so the way I try to write about work, politics, power, money, well being is to just, you know, infuse a little bit of myself into those stories. So I am an old fashioned blogger, and I think blogging's coming back in 2025. So, yeah.
Yours definitely is. So that's great. So thank you, Laurie, for joining us today. It's always wonderful to talk to you. Everybody, check out her website, buy her book, Betting on You, change your life, get out of the gutter, and
Wait, and go eat ice cream.
go eat ice cream, all 31 flavors.
That's right.
And so thanks again, and we'll see you next episode, everybody.